A Navy SEAL stood in a military kennel at 7 a.m., watching decorated war dogs get auctioned off to strangers. His dog Rex pulled the leash so hard it burned his palm. That was the moment Liam Calloway made a decision that would cost him everything. Subscribe. You need to see how this ends. The text came in at 4:15 inches the morning, and Liam Calloway was already awake. He'd been awake for most of the night. The way he was awake most nights. Not restless, not anxious, just present in the dark, in a way that felt more honest than sleep. He was sitting at the kitchen table in his grandfather's old house, outside Chesapeake, Virginia, with a cup of coffee gone cold and Rex lying across his feet, like a warm anchor when the phone lit up on the table between them. He looked at the number for a long time before he read the message. He didn't recognize it. A Virginia area code, prepaid, untraceable. But the message that followed used a phrase only one person had ever said to him, a line from a checkpoint outside Mosul that had no reason to exist in anyone else's memory. Jake Torres, killed in action, Kandahar province 14 months ago. Confirmed. Official. A folded flag and a phone call that came while Liam was still recovering from his own shrapnel wounds at Walter Reed. And now at 4:15 on a Tuesday morning, an untraceable number was lighting up his phone with a message that read, "They're selling them. All of them. Today, Fort Langdon Disposition Center. Come now. Bring Rex." Liam set the phone face down on the table. Rex lifted his head. The dog watched him with the particular patience of an animal that has learned to read a man's stillness, the way other animals read weather, not reacting to what was happening, but to what was about to. Liam picked the phone back up. He read the message again. Then he said quietly, "To no one," and to Rex, simultaneously, "Okay." He was on the road. Before 5. Rex rode shotgun the way he always did. 80 pounds of muscle and loyalty pressed against the passenger door. Nose tilted toward the cracked window ears, rotating at frequencies Liam couldn't hear. The dog had been his partner for 4 deployments before a compound breach in Mosul left Rex with a reconstructed hip and Liam with 3 months of physical therapy and 6 months of bureaucratic warfare to bring the dog home. That was 2 years ago. Since then, Rex had not spent a single night in a different building than Liam. It wasn't a decision either of them had made. It was just what had happened, the way certain things become true, not because you choose them, but because the alternative is unthinkable. The drive to Fort Langdon took just under 3 hours. Liam didn't play music. He didn't listen to the radio. He drank gas station coffee from a paper cup and thought about Jake Torres, who was either dead or not dead, and about what either possibility meant for the morning ahead. Fort Langdon sat 20 minutes west of the coast, a mid-sized military installation that had been quietly consolidating functions for the past 3 years as defense budgets contracted and base commanders were asked to do more with less. When Liam pulled up to the gate at 7:30, the guard waved him through with the casual authority of someone who'd been on shift since midnight and was counting minutes. Rex sat up straighter as they passed the perimeter fence. Liam noticed. He didn't say anything. They parked near the main kennel facility, a low concrete building with chain-link runs along the south side, and the particular institutional smell of bleach and stress that Liam recognized from every forward operating base he'd ever been on. A civilian contractor in a safety vest was talking to a security guard near the entrance. Liam caught the tail end of their conversation as he passed. Budget cuts last year. They consolidated training and disposition under one roof. Rex stepped out of the truck and immediately changed. Not in any way that would have been visible to someone who didn't know him. His gait was the same. His posture was the same, but Liam felt it in the leash, a subtle forward pressure, not memory. Something older than memory. Rex turned left at the first junction inside the facility without waiting for direction. moving with the deliberate economy of a detection dog, locked onto a scent and stopped in front of a cage door at the far end. Liam didn't ask. He pushed it open. The sound hit him first. Not barking, crying. 12 military working dogs in transport kennels, arranged in 2 rows of 6, and the sound coming from that room was not the sound of animals that were hungry or cold or bored. It was the sound of something that had once been loved and understood, precisely and without confusion that it had been forgotten. Liam stood in the doorway and felt something shift in his chest, quiet and tectonic, the way grief moves when it has been living inside you long enough to stop asking permission. At the far end of the second row, Rex stopped. Liam didn't need to look at the kennel tag to know. The dog lying against the back wall of the crate was a German shepherd, male, maybe 7 years old, his coat dull and matted his ribs, visible even through the fur. His eyes were open, but they were pointed at nothing, not the ceiling, not the door, not the people who had been walking through this room all morning, evaluating him like livestock. He was somewhere else entirely, in the way that animals go somewhere else when the present becomes too much to remain in. Rex pressed his nose against the kennel bars. The dog inside didn't move. Then slowly, like something coming back from a very long distance, one ear rotated. Shadow. Liam had seen photographs. Jake had kept one folded in his left breast pocket on every deployment, a slightly out-of-focus image of a dog mid-jump in a training yard, blurred with speed and happiness. Liam knelt. His knees hit the concrete floor and he didn't feel it. "Hey," he said, and his voice came out quieter than he intended. "I know who you are." Shadow lifted his head. Not much, just enough to look. And in that small movement Liam saw something that undid him more than the crying had not hope. Exactly, but the memory of hope, like a word in a language you haven't spoken in years, that you suddenly find you still know. Behind him, the room had filled. 30 or 40 civilians moving between the kennels. A heavy-set man in a leather vest prying open a dog's mouth to check its teeth. A woman with a clipboard photographing ear tattoos. 2 men in the back arguing about bloodline verification in voices that carried no awareness that they were being monstrous. At a folding table near the entrance, a man in Navy service khakis sat behind a cash box and a stack of forms. His nameplate read Lieutenant Commander Gerald Monk. He had the complexion of someone who had spent his entire career in fluorescent light, making decisions he never had to see the consequences of. "You interested in one?" Monk asked, not looking up. Liam stood. He turned to face the table. "These are military working dogs. Retired military working dogs," Monk said. "Failed behavioral assessments. Deemed unsuitable for continued service." He finally looked up. His eyes moved from Liam's civilian clothes to Rex, and his expression settled into something between dismissal and mild amusement. "You have a problem with the process. File a complaint through proper channels. The bidding starts in 20 minutes. Liam looked at the room. He looked at the man with the leather vest. He looked at Shadow, who had pressed his nose against the kennel bars now that Rex was still there, still present, still not leaving. Rex had lain down on the concrete in front of the kennel. He had placed his head on his paws and was looking at Shadow with the unhurried patience of an animal that has nowhere else to be. Shadow watched him. Neither dog made a sound. And in that silence, Liam made the only decision that was available to him. He called Marcus Rains at 7:52 inches the morning. Marcus was a former SEAL, 2 deployments together in Mosul, now running a private security firm out of Arlington. He answered on the second ring. Liam said, "I need $140, 0000 wired through Rains Security Group to a civilian disposition broker at Fort Langdon. The broker accepts third-party purchase bids. You have 20 minutes before the floor opens." There was a pause. "How much?" $140. 000. 7 seconds of silence. Not hesitation. Calculation. Then, sending now. Liam knew what he was spending. Not money. Something from Mosul that neither of them had ever named, a debt that ran in both directions and couldn't be repaid in cash. He'd had $18, 500 inches, his checking account since 3 weeks ago when he sold his F-150, hadn't known what to spend it on, hadn't been able to imagine anything worth spending it on until right now. He walked to the auctioneer's platform, waited for the microphone to be switched on, and said into the ambient noise of the room, with the particular flatness of a man who has spent years giving commands in places where the wrong word gets people killed, "I'll take all of them." The room went quiet. Monk looked up. The auctioneer froze. "All 12, Liam said. "Name your price." He looked at Monk directly. "And then explain to me why the medical records are sealed." Dr. Maya Chen was waiting outside the kennel facility when Liam came out, and the way she was waiting, arms crossed, weight forward, eyes already on him before he pushed through the door, told him she had been there for a while. She was in her early 40s, compact and deliberate, with the posture of someone who had spent years standing in operating theaters, requiring perfect stillness. She was no longer in uniform. The way she wasn't in uniform had a specific quality to it, not the looseness of someone who had left the military and been glad to. The tightness of someone who had been removed from it and hadn't yet found a way to stand, that didn't still feel like attention. "You're the one who stopped the auction," she said. Not a question. "Maya Chen. I was the chief veterinary officer at this installation until 14 months ago, when I was transferred to a desk position at Fort Bragg for reasons that were never formally documented." Liam said. "What kind of reasons?" She looked at him for a moment. "The kind that don't need to be documented when the person being transferred doesn't have enough seniority to push back." Rex had come out behind Liam and was now sitting between them, watching Maya with the direct, unblinking assessment that he applied to every person he hadn't previously cleared. Maya looked down at him. She didn't reach out to pet him. She just held his gaze. Rex watched her for 90 seconds, an eternity in dog time, and then did something Liam had seen him do with fewer than a dozen people in 2 years. He lowered his head slightly. Maya exhaled. "Your dog just told me more about you than you have," she said. Quinn Hartley arrived, 10 minutes later, in a grey Civic with a cracked rear bumper and a passenger seat buried under manila folders. She was 28, dark-haired, with the organized intensity of someone who had been building a case for a long time and had learned to compact her urgency into something that looked, from the outside, like stillness. She wrote under the byline, R. Callahan, for a small investigative publication out of Richmond, a detail she shared without being asked, as if she'd answered that question enough times to get ahead of it. "Helix Canine Solutions doesn't track regional outlets," she said. "They only monitor national media. 16 months of work, and they have no idea I exist." The name on the byline was her mother's maiden name. Liam didn't ask why. Something in the way she said it made asking feel like the wrong kind of curiosity. Rex, who had accepted Maya with his head dip, approached Quinn differently. He sat in front of her and looked at her without blinking for nearly 2 full minutes. Quinn didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't try to bridge the silence with a gesture. She just looked back. Eventually Rex walked to her and placed his head in her lap. Maya said softly, "He reads something in people before we can." Quinn put her hand on Rex's head, and Liam noticed that her hand was trembling very slightly, and that she let it tremble without trying to stop it, and that this was its own kind of courage. They drove to a diner 6 miles from the base, a place with vinyl booths and coffee that came in a pot left on the table, and Quinn laid her folders out in a specific order. The order of someone who has rehearsed this presentation many times in her head and finally has the right audience: Helix Canine Solutions. A private defense contractor based out of Norfolk, Established 8 years ago by Desmond Hale, a former logistics officer who had pivoted from military equipment contracts to military working dog supply when the former dried up. The model was elegant in the way that corrupt things often are simple enough to hide in plain sight. Helix supplied replacement dogs to the military. Younger animals fast-tracked through abbreviated training programs sold at a premium under contracts that specified quality metrics Helix wrote themselves. To create demand for those replacement dogs, they needed the current dogs, the experienced battle-tested animals, to disappear. Lieutenant Commander Gerald Monk controlled the disposition process. He decided which dogs failed their behavioral reassessments, when they failed, and where they went. Valor Shield LLC, a shell company registered in Delaware, paid him $180,000 a year for what was described in the filing as strategic consultation. The number had been chosen carefully large enough to matter small enough not to trigger automatic review. $35 million had passed through Helix's defense contracts in the last 4 years. Rex was sitting under the table with his chin on Liam's foot, and Liam was listening to all of this, with the particular quality of attention he'd developed in rooms where information had a body count attached to it. Then Quinn said, "The intelligence package used for Operation Whisper in Kandahar 14 months ago." Liam stopped breathing. It was sourced through a Helix subcontractor. The entry point was wrong. The compound layout was inaccurate. 3 days before the operation, updated intelligence, indicating the layout had changed, was received by the subcontractor and not forwarded. The room didn't change. The diner kept going around them, the clatter of plates, the hiss of the coffee machine, someone laughing at a table near the window. "They knew," Liam said. The word came out flat without inflection because all the inflection had gone somewhere deeper than his voice. They knew the entry was compromised, and they let the team go in. Maya said quietly, "We can't prove deliberate suppression yet. That's what we need Jake Torres' drive for." Liam looked up. "Jake Torres is dead." A beat of silence. Quinn met his eyes. "That's what they reported," she said. Liam thought about the text message. 4:15 in the morning. An untraceable number, carrying a dead man's words. He had been telling himself it was someone who had found the phrase somewhere, a coincidence with an ugly shape. He had been telling himself that because the alternative was something he didn't know what to do with, he set his coffee cup down very carefully on the table and said, "Tell me where he is." Desmond Hale called at 2:17 inches the afternoon. The number came up as a Virginia area code. Liam didn't recognize, and he answered it the way. He answered all unknown numbers, fully present, giving nothing away. The voice on the other end was smooth and considered with the specific cadence of a man who had spent years in rooms where he controlled all the information. "Mr. Calloway, my name is Desmond Hale. I understand you made quite an impression at Fort Langdon this morning." Liam said nothing. "I want you to know I have enormous respect for your service record. 4 deployments. Silver Star, Purple Heart. A man like you has options. A future. I'd hate to see that complicated by a misunderstanding about some retired animals." "They're not retired," Liam said. "They were removed." Another pause. "Budget decisions don't." The word came out quiet in the register he used when things had stopped being negotiable. "Don't explain it to me like I'm a newspaper. Tell me what you want." What Hale wanted, stripped of the language he used to dress it up, was for Liam to take his 12 dogs and go home. The case against Helix, Hale said, was built on documents obtained through improper channels and the testimony of a disgruntled former employee. Any legal action would be tied up in military jurisdiction for years. And Liam specifically had a very clean record that would be a shame to complicate. Liam let him finish. Then he said Jake Torres' intelligence package. "Kandahar. You had updated layout data 3 days before the operation." Silence. 5 seconds of it. Then the smoothness went out of Hale's voice, and what replaced it was harder and more honest. "Walk away, Mr. Calloway. While walking is still an option." Liam hung up. 30 minutes later, Sergeant First Class Ed Hawkins called from a number Maya recognized. He spoke in the low, careful voice of a man calling from somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. His dog Bravo, a Belgian Malinois he'd handled for 6 years before Bravo was retired and disposed of through Helix's pipeline 8 months ago, had just been recovered in a raid on a dogfighting operation in Richmond. Alive, barely. Liam heard the precise moment in the call when Hawkins stopped being afraid. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was very quiet. It was the moment when Hawkins described arriving at the animal control facility and seeing Bravo lying on a metal table with a vet tech, pressing a cloth against a wound in his shoulder, and Bravo's tail moving when Hawkins walked through the door, thin and slow and absolutely certain. "I have something," Hawkins said. "I took it from Monk's office 3 months ago. A communication log, encrypted emails between Monk and Hale. Most of it I can't read. But there's one chain that isn't encrypted, about Kandahar, about the decision not to forward the updated layout data." He stopped. They knew the entry point was wrong. They made a choice. Liam sat with that for a moment. Rex had moved from under the table to sit beside him, pressed against his leg in that particular way, not demanding, just present, a dog that has learned that sometimes presence is the only thing that helps. "I'll come to you," Liam said to Hawkins. "Tonight." Matthews County was 40 minutes from the Chesapeake coast, down 2-lane roads that narrowed into gravel, and then into a dirt track that ended at a pine grove above a creek. The cabin was small, 1 room, a wood stove, a cot, a folding table, and it smelled like coffee and wood smoke, and the particular odor of someone who had been living without many options for a long time. Patricia Hawkins had been coming every weekend for 14 months, telling Ed she was visiting her college roommate in Gloucester. She paid cash for the cabin rental under the name Margaret Hollis, her roommate's actual name, and brought groceries and a charged burner phone, and, once in January, a space heater when the wood stove wasn't enough. She was 52 years old, a former high school English teacher, and she had been doing all of this alone, without telling anyone, because the alternative was allowing a living man to be treated as a dead one. Jake had asked her not to tell Ed. If Ed knew and said nothing, he became complicit in the eyes of anyone watching. If Ed knew and acted, he became a target before they were ready. The only way to protect him was to keep him outside of it entirely, and Patricia had decided in the specific way that people who have taught teenagers for 30 years make decisions, that this was a weight she could carry alone. Jake Torres opened the cabin door before Liam reached it. He looked like someone who had been sick for a long time and was still deciding whether to get better. He had been pulled from the compound by a contractor medic working for Helix's field unit, someone whose job, it turned out, had been to ensure that whoever survived that entry point did not survive the paperwork. The KIA report had been filed before anyone in the chain of command had seen a body. By the time the discrepancy could have been questioned, Jake was already in a civilian hospital in Germany under a name that wasn't his, and the man who could have corrected the record had decided it was safer not to. His face was thinner than Liam, remembered his eyes older, his hair longer in the way. Hair gets longer when you stop thinking about it. He looked at Liam for a moment without speaking. Then he looked at Rex. And Rex, who had been walking at Liam's heel, calm and deliberate, stopped. His head came up. Something moved through his body that wasn't quite a tremble and wasn't quite stillness. He knew this man. He had trained with this man's dog. He had shared exercises and kennels and the particular professional brotherhood of working dogs on the same installation. He looked at Jake, with recognition so complete, it didn't need expression. Jake crouched down. Rex walked forward and pressed his forehead against Jake's chest and stayed there. Jake's hand came up to the back of Rex's neck. Neither of them moved for a long time. Liam stood back and let it happen, and felt for reasons he didn't fully understand that he was witnessing something more important than a reunion. Shadow was on the cot at the back of the cabin. When Jake entered the room, the dog did something he hadn't done in weeks. According to Jake, he stood up. Not quickly, not easily. He got his legs under him with the careful effort of an animal relearning a movement, and he stood, and his tail moved. Slow and certain, like a clock that has been stopped and remembers suddenly what it was made for. Jake sat on the edge of the cot. Shadow pressed his face against Jake's shoulder. Jake held the dog with both arms and said nothing. Maya, who had come in behind Liam, watched this for a moment and then said quietly, to no one in particular, "He's been drugged. A compound that suppresses trained behavioral responses, makes a working dog present as failed in assessment. It metabolizes in 4 to 6 weeks. That's why his evaluations came back as failures. Whoever retired him knew exactly what they were doing." She looked at Jake. The drive. Jake reached under the cot and pulled out a small fireproof lockbox. Inside was a portable hard drive, a USB drive, and a handwritten index on a folded piece of paper. 14 months, he said. No internet, no cloud, no copies. I knew they were looking for a digital trail. He handed the drive to Liam. "I need you to understand something. I didn't send that message to save the dogs." He looked at him steadily. "I sent it because you're the only person I knew had been blocked enough times to be angry enough to do this right." They moved at 2:45 inches the morning. Liam, Maya, Quinn and Hawkins, 4 people in 2 vehicles driving without headlights for the last quarter mile. Rex rode in the back of Liam's truck this time, not in the cab, because he needed to be ready to move without the delay of a door. Fort Langdon at 3 in the morning was a different place than Fort Langdon in daylight. The security rotation was reduced, the cameras were on but unwatched, and the disposition center was technically in a post-event administrative hold, meaning the dogs were still on site, but the day's paperwork hadn't cleared, which gave them a narrow window of jurisdictional ambiguity that NCIS Special Agent Karen Wolfe had described in a call with Liam at midnight as not nothing. Wolfe's warrant had been filed at 11. The duty magistrate had signed it at 11:40. It would become executable in 43 minutes, the standard processing window for a nighttime federal premises authorization. Liam needed those 43 minutes. He needed them inside. Rex stepped out of the truck and turned left before Liam gave any direction, the same turn he'd made that morning. The same corridor, the same invisible thread through the dark that had led him here before. He moved slowly enough for the humans behind him, pausing at a junction and glancing back the way a guide pauses to confirm the group is still together, and then moved on. At the 3rd junction, he stopped. His head came up toward a corner of the ceiling where the wall met a ventilation housing. Liam looked at Quinn, who pulled up the building schematic on her phone and zoomed in on that corner. A secondary camera, not on the original map. Monk had added it. Quinn looked at Liam. "He's here. He knows we're coming. Then he's already called someone," Maya said. Liam shook his head. Wolfe put a communications flag on his credentials at 2300. Any outgoing call from his access ID routes to a recording buffer. He can dial, but no one picks up. He looked at the camera. He knows we're here. He just can't do anything about it. We stay with the plan, Liam said. 43 minutes. In the kennel room, 11 dogs heard Rex before they saw him. The effect was immediate and absolute heads up, ears forward, noses to the gaps in the kennel doors, and then, as if by consensus, complete silence. No barking, no whining, not even the shift of paws on kennel floors. Liam had been in rooms with military working dogs his entire career, and he had never experienced this before, a room full of dogs that had chosen collectively to be silent in the presence of a dog they recognized as one of their own. It lasted for the entire 43 minutes. They opened kennels one by one. Titan came out first, heavy and deliberate, his hips stiff from confinement, his head up in a way that said he remembered what he was, even if the humans around him had forgotten. Ranger emerged, nose first, cataloguing the room with the systematic efficiency of a detection dog who cannot turn off the training even in his own rescue. Some of the others needed time, stood at the kennel door, and looked before they moved, the hesitation of animals that have been misled enough times to need confirmation. Rex moved between them. He didn't perform anything. He was simply present, moving among them, and where he moved, the hesitation eased. Shadow was the last to come out. Jake was in the room by then. He had come in through the loading entrance driven by Patricia, who was parked 300 yards out. Shadow walked to Jake and pressed his face against the side of his leg and stayed there. And in the parking lot, when the warrant hit Wolf's phone at 332 and she said, "Go into her radio." Monk was already running toward the kennel building. He arrived to find it empty, and the distant sound of a truck engine and 12 dogs that were already 3 miles from the perimeter and moving toward the coast. Hale's chartered flight was wheels up in 90 minutes. The information came from Wolf at 351, delivered in the flat, controlled tone of an agent, managing multiple simultaneous problems. Tidewater Air Executive Terminal south of Norfolk. A Cessna citation filed under a corporate entity, destination Grand Cayman. If he clears U.S. airspace, Wolf said. I need 3 working days to get an extradition process started. In 3 working days, Hale's lawyers will have every piece of financial evidence reclassified under proprietary defense contractor protections. Liam was in the back of the van with Rex and Shadow and 9 other dogs heading south on Route 17 with Maya monitoring vitals in the seat behind him. He called Patricia Hawkins. She answered immediately, which meant she'd been waiting. He explained the terminal, the tail number, the window. 30 seconds of silence on her end. Then she said, "My nephew manages maintenance scheduling at Tidewater Air. He owes me a favor." A pause. He's going to owe me a bigger one. Patricia's nephew identified a hydraulic pressure irregularity in the pre-flight checklist, real enough to require documentation, slow enough to buy 40 minutes. Simultaneously, Liam reached a former colleague at TSA who had processed his security clearance renewals for 3 deployments, and who, when Liam explained the situation in 2 sentences, said, "I have a flag I can put on a tail number. It's not an arrest, it's a review. Gives you 20 minutes while they verify." Together, the 2 delays gave them 63 minutes. 63 minutes against a man with lawyers and money and a jet. Quinn was on her laptop in the front seat, transmitting the document files from Jake's drive to Wolf's secure server, and she was doing it with the focused efficiency of someone who has been building toward this moment for over a year. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Her father's name. Liam from the back couldn't see her face, but he saw her hand. He saw the way it tightened on the phone, the way her shoulders changed. She hadn't spoken to Colonel Hartley in weeks. Their relationship had become the particular kind of silence that accumulates between people when one of them knows something the other needs and doesn't know how to give it. She started to dial. Liam reached forward and put his hand on her wrist. Not hard, just present. "Not like this," he said. "Not when it's still happening." Quinn looked at the screen for another moment. Then she set the phone on the dash. Her hands were shaking and she let them shake, and she kept typing. That was the moment Liam understood that Quinn Hartley had not been doing this for justice in any abstract sense. She had been doing it because her father had been quieted by the same system that had killed Jake Torres' reputation and sold Bravo into a fighting ring and left Shadow in a concrete box with no one to wait for. She had been doing it because she loved someone who had been silenced, and silence is its own kind of violence, and some people respond to that violence by becoming very good at making noise. Wolf called at 447. "We have him." He's in custody at the terminal. In the back of the van, Shadow had fallen asleep with his head in Jake's lap. Rex was sitting upright, watching the road ahead through the windshield ears forward. Liam leaned back against the van wall and let out a breath that had been sitting in his chest since 4:15 the previous morning. The federal trial ran for 19 days in the Eastern District of Virginia, in a courtroom that filled every morning with the particular gravity of proceedings that involve both money and the dead. Maya testified for 2 days, clinical precise, devastating in the way that someone is devastating when they know more than the people questioning them, and have had months to decide exactly how much to reveal and in what order. She presented the neurological scans of Shadow before and after the metabolization of the suppressing compound as evidence of pharmaceutical intervention. Helix's lead counsel objected 4 times during her testimony. The judge sustained none of them. Hawkins testified about the emails, about the months of silence, about the night he drove to an animal control facility in Richmond and found Bravo on a metal table and understood, in the specific way that people understand things when they see the physical consequences of their decisions, that his silence had not protected anyone, including himself. He was composed through most of it. He broke once briefly when the prosecutor asked him to describe Bravo's condition at the time of recovery. He stopped speaking for 11 seconds. Then he finished the sentence. Quinn testified last, among the civilian witnesses. When Helix's attorney asked whether her investigation had been motivated by personal grievance rather than journalistic objectivity, she said yes. And I'd ask you to explain to this court why the personal grievance of a daughter watching her father's career destroyed by retaliation makes the documents she found less accurate. The courtroom was quiet for a moment. The judge made a note. Liam testified about Kandahar. He told the court about the intelligence package. He told them about the entry point, the IED in the doorframe, the medevac, the 14 months of silence. He told them about the 4 times he had tried to access Jake Torres's file and been redirected, warned, and finally told by a man with 2 stars on his collar that he had done enough and should go home. And then he said the thing that he had not said out loud to anyone, not to Maya, not to Quinn, not to Jake. Since the morning he'd stood in the kennel facility and made a promise to 12 dogs and a message from a dead man. Jake Torres called me the night before Kandahar. He said something felt wrong about the entry data. I told him I'd take it up the chain in the morning, that we'd flag it at the 0 dark brief and get eyes on it before we moved. He said okay. I told him I'd see him for breakfast after the debrief. I went to sleep thinking I'd handled it. The brief was cancelled at 0300. We were told the intelligence had been verified at the command level. We went in at 0415. He stopped. The courtroom was very still. I have thought about that phone call every day for 14 months. I have tried to find the version of it where I listened differently. I have not found it yet. In the back row, Marcus Raines sat in civilian clothes, unannounced and uninvited, and said nothing. Rex was brought into the courtroom for Jake's testimony under an accommodation for witness support, authorized by the judge, after Jake's attorney submitted a psychiatric support request. Liam walked him in through the side door and took a seat in the gallery. When Jake testified and his voice broke describing the moment the entry team crossed the threshold, Rex stood up from his position beside the witness stand and placed his head on Jake's hand. The judge stopped the proceedings. 5 minutes recess. No one spoke. No one needed to. Desmond Hale was convicted on 11 counts. 34 years federal. Gerald Monk was convicted on 8 counts. 22 years. After the verdict, Marcus Raines found Liam in the courthouse corridor. He didn't say much. He said, "You don't owe me anything. You never did." Liam looked at him for a moment. He didn't argue. 6 months after the verdict, the Torres Calloway Foundation opened on 12 acres of Liam's grandfather's land above the Chesapeake Bay. 15 retired military working dogs lived there in open runs in the coastal grass, in the light of a place that had no reason to diminish them. The foundation did two things. It provided lifetime care for retired MWDs who had nowhere else to go, and it matched combat veterans suffering from PTSD with those dogs, a program so simple in concept and so precise in execution that the VA's partnership request came within 90 days of the launch, and the waiting list had grown to 400 names by the time they opened the doors. The morning of the opening, Marcus Rains arrived in a truck. Liam didn't recognize, wearing jeans and a plain grey shirt. He found Liam near the main kennel and said, "Tell me what you need done." Not a donation, not a speech, just a question about what needed doing. Liam put him to work repairing a fence line. Jake was there, thinner than before but more present, Shadow moving at his heel with the recovered certainty of a dog that has been given back its purpose and remembers what purpose feels like. Ed Hawkins had retired from the military 3 months earlier and joined the foundation full-time, running the matching program with the particular competence of a man who needed, after a long period of failing something, to be very good at something. Patricia came on weekends. Quinn's father had his service records submitted for formal review by the Inspector General's office as part of the broader investigation. The review took 4 months. The outcome was 2 paragraphs in a report that most people would never read, and a phone call Quinn received on a Tuesday morning that she had been waiting for since she was 23 years old. She called Liam afterward. She didn't say much. He didn't ask her to. Phantom was the last dog, recovered, a German shepherd, found on a rural property in West Virginia, chained in a yard. 9 years of service, 3 combat deployments, barely able to lift his head when the rescue team arrived. They brought him to the foundation, and Maya assessed him, and the assessment said physically stable, psychologically collapsed. Rex spent 72 hours lying beside Phantom. No interaction, no play, no demand of any kind. Just a dog, choosing without being asked. To remain beside another dog that had stopped believing remaining was worth it. On the 4th day, Phantom turned his head and pressed his nose against Rex's ear. It was quiet and small and entirely sufficient. Quinn found Liam on the back porch that evening, after the guests had gone, and the dogs were moving in the long grass below the bluff in the gold of the hour before dark. She sat beside him. She said, "I have something to tell you." She told him. The world paused. The wind, the grass, the sound of dogs, all of it for exactly the amount of time it took for the information to find its place. Then Liam put his arm around her and said nothing for a long time because there was nothing that needed saying. Jake came out a few minutes later, with Shadow at his heels, saw their faces, and understood without being told. He raised his coffee cup. Rex, who had been lying at Liam's feet, lifted his head. His tail moved slow and steady and certain, the way things move when they have finally, after a long time and a great deal of difficulty, arrived exactly where they were supposed to be. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs it today. Tell us in the comments which moment hit you hardest and where in the world are you watching from.